Hello everyone! This is my first video. I decided to make it over my recent painting I did of Link from Breath of the Wild. This is a pretty heavily edited video of it as well. All of the footage, not even including all of it since some of it did not get captured, would have been over 30 minutes, so I hope the bits and pieces I have are okay. I tried to capture, every little technique that I did kind of to summarize the whole painting so you guys can kind of see what I did to make each piece of it. So yeah, if you guys have any suggestions on how to make my videos better, please let me know. I don't have too much experience with this, so please bear with me in the beginning while I get better. So after I had finished doing the initial rough shadow sketching, where I had a base color of blue and then put the flat coloring over it and just kind of erased away to get those initial shadows, I did a multiply layer and kind of adjusted the color and erased it as well to make even brighter highlights and darker lowlights. In order to just emphasize everything again, these will be the base shadows that I kind of work off of for the rest of the painting. The next thing I do is I go in with, I believe, an overlay layer with just several different colors, and I just kind of splash them all around the painting. I did it everywhere where pinks in certain areas and blues in other areas. Some pieces had certain colors while other pieces had different colors, just to make it look more balanced. I love having color in my work, and I'm still working on it, as you can see. I'm trying to figure out how to harmonize everything, make things pop and more vibrant, but also work together. It's a learning process for sure, but hopefully I'll get better with more practice, as always. After I do the initial color splashing, I go in, merge all of my layers together, and I just kind of start painting. I redefine edges, clean everything up, mix all the colors in. A lot of the initial coloring from the splashing, or whatever that you want to call that technique, kind of get lost and blended into everything else, but this is okay. It still made everything pop and look a lot better and a lot less flat, so I'm happy with how this kind of stage turned out, I think. Another thing I really like experimenting with in my paintings are like halftones or bounce lighting, which are just the lighter shades you see between like the darker shadows and the lightest shadows. I splash them in all around my paintings. I don't know if I overdo it or not, but it's something that I really like to experiment with, and it makes things look a lot more 3D. So if it's not something that you know about or have ever tried before, I would definitely recommend doing it. It can bring a lot more definition to a painting, and it's something that a lot of people do. So yeah. Another thing I started experimenting with doing in this piece was that more grainy sort of brush that I've been using a little bit here, but will start using more heavily later on in this piece. I wanted to experiment with more textures in this. I had been watching some videos on YouTube recently that really inspired it in me, how you can use texture to pronounce color or lighting or shadows. This one I think I went a little bit overboard with the grainy texture, and it just ended up looking like the whole thing was painted grainy, but I do think I liked the outcome in the ending, even though it wasn't what I was initially trying to go for. But yeah, experimenting with different textures and stuff like that is very fun, and I would definitely recommend that as well if you haven't done it. One thing that I think I definitely struggled with in this painting just a little bit was the making of the bow. Kind of trying to decide where the shadows would be, since it is a thinner object. The shadows kind of behave a lot differently. I used a lot more of the grainy texture starting here, I think, as well. A trick that you can use is just working on one half of, if it's a symmetrical object, just working on one half of that object and kind of defining it, getting all those shadows done and copy pasting it to the other side is a very easy way to make them both look the same, but it cuts down a lot of time too. So that is something that I didn't do in some parts, as you might see. I ended up defining one side, not liking it, and then just defining the other side and bringing it back over. So yeah, definitely remember, if you're working with symmetrical objects, you can just work on one half and then copy paste the other half. So that's a technique I used a lot to make this bow. Another thing I started experimenting with in this photo was the background. I've done a little bit of experimenting with backgrounds before. Another piece featured like a dark forest, but it was never really super detailed, and the intention was to blur it in the background anyway, because the focus was a lot more on the foreground. So I definitely consider this like the first super detailed background that I have ever attempted doing. I did end up using a reference for this a little later on. You'll kind of see me add in some darker grays, but one thing that I did that really helped me in this photo, or for making this background, was zooming way out and starting there first, so that way you can kind of get the whole composition of just everything you're doing, whether it's mountains, trees, or whatever, rather than focusing on the details first, and that'll help you bring kind of the whole piece together. So yeah, and that way you can just keep zooming in and making more details until you're happy. So yeah, I'm definitely happy with the way it turned out in the ending. I don't have the very ending of it recorded, unfortunately, but I'm very happy, and I'm excited to continue learning about them. I have a long ways to go with backgrounds, but I'm excited to learn more about it. Also, I mistakenly forgot to capture the making of the actual arrowhead, but I had to go through and kind of copy the shape from a reference photo, and then I ended up drawing over the top of that. It still looks a little off. The symmetry isn't perfect, but I think it still turned out okay in the final piece, because I feel like you can't really tell that much, I hope. But yeah, I really like the look of the ice arrows. I actually like the look of a lot of the special arrows, but I kind of wanted to capture, especially since he was in the winter, I thought using the ice arrow would be really cool, and capture how it looks when he's shooting the arrow. So yeah. Since I forgot to capture the editing from when I started using the reference and the mountain started looking more realistic, I'm going to try to explain kind of what I did. The shadows that were initially laid out in the snow, like the darker blues that you saw me add in from like the initial sketching period, I just kind of changed it with the dark gray of the rock, and I added it in, and then I just kind of went back and forth with the snow, trying to make it look like the snow was laying on the top part of the rocks, and then the parts that were kind of going down and were more vertical, I guess, did not have snow on them. So I just kind of went back and forth until I was kind of happy with it, and then I would zoom in and do more details and more details, just kind of adding in those shadows and more highlights and stuff like that. So if that makes any sense, that's kind of how I did it. An interesting thing I think I can mention about the highlights was I originally tried to go in with the grainy texture to kind of make it look like the lighting wasn't super opaque on him, but it didn't quite work out, so I ended up having to go in with just my regular painting brush and make things sort of opaque, and then go back in with the grainy brush and erase and add that way to kind of make it taper off a little more and make it a little bit more transparent so that it wasn't super bright on his face and his clothes and other areas where the highlights are. And yeah, here's the final product. I hope you all enjoyed this process. I wasn't very good at talking for 12 minutes straight, so my voice is going to be cutting in and out of this video. But regardless, I hope that some of my process was explained. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below. I will answer to the best of my ability. I will also have the software and everything that I use in the description as well, so please be sure to check that out, and I'll see you guys for the next video.